Um, in my way of thinking, there's one overwhelming issue at play when we speak of the need for multilateral cooperation in Northeast Asia, and that's the current problem of North Korea. As we like to say, it's the elephant in the room about which policymakers conveniently ignore. At least that was the case until all the new discussion of Korean unification was spawned by President Park's unification bonanza talks early this year. And as mentioned by Ambassador An earlier, I, for one, welcome this discussion, since for a long time I've thought we in the West, and especially those in South Korea, have been paralyzed in our engagement policies by fear of Iraq-like disasters should the North and South ever become unified. If anything, regional multilateral cooperation has been aimed at maintaining the status quo, not unification, for at least the last 25 years. But by now, in my view, this has gone long enough, and these two highly complementary, very different economies need to begin preparations for integration and ultimate unification. Given the right reformist policies, economic growth in the North would be spectacular. In the South, even the region, if it prepares correctly, would benefit greatly. I thus agree completely with President Park on all those points. The trick, of course, is to convince North Koreans that they, not South Korean, Chinese, Japanese, or American carpetbaggers, will be the primary beneficiaries so that they can lead the way to self-reform. Now, I realize in reading this, writing this, that I need to define this term carpetbaggers, perhaps for the Koreans in the audience. Carpetbaggers is a term of art, especially in the American South, after the Civil War ended 150 years ago. Of course, the South lost. The story is, and I think it's partly true, that a lot of northern businessmen came down into the South with big carpet bags of money, you can imagine, and bought up all the houses, the best land, all the best property. So that term carpetbag is a very pejorative word, at least down in South Carolina where I'm from. It stymied the development of the South and relations with the North for over 100 years. That to me is a lesson for South Korea in looking at North Korea. When I've been a little bit into North Korea, I've seen North Koreans, to me, they look like they're afraid of South Korean carpetbaggers. Something for you to worry about. If they're worried about carpetbaggers, they'll defend their army to the last death. Now, partly I'm thinking for this to work, this unification to work, is what we really need to do is what I describe as helping the North create what I call an ownership society, private ownership society in the North. I gave a paper earlier this year at the Council of Foreign Affairs here in DC on the economics of unification. It works through some of the issues that I think should be economic preconditions and steps for unification that are worth repeating here. So I'll just list them briefly here. I won't really go into them. 10 steps for economic unification. These, I think, we can start now. You're the council, the Unification Council. I would start thinking about each of these right now. And I think different from the first panel, even though I'm an economist, I tend to be much more optimistic about changes going on in North Korea. Certainly not top-down. Bruce Klinger was quite right, and they pushed back very heavily on this idea of reform from the top. But what is really happening in North Korea is reform from the bottom. Since 2009 currency fiasco, they've lost control of their markets, they've lost control of their money. US dollars, Chinese RMB is moving widely in North Korea. Business things are happening, taxis are working. A lot of changes are beginning to happen. Again, not from the top, the government doesn't want it, but they're happening spontaneously. Something that we need to promote. So again, to the 10 steps real quickly. First, most important, maintain financial financial stability in South Korea throughout this transition. This means lining up foreign credit lines and being careful in the issuance of new debt. Your government has always been careful this way, so I'm not too concerned. In other words, no big Marshall Plan for North Korea, financed by South Korea. This will be relatively easy if the US, Japan, and China help back the South Korean won as a transition period begins, and if Seoul exercises needed restraints. Second, cooperate with Pyongyang to maintain a separate monetary system in the North for some time. One potential might be a currency board arrangement using US dollars, the way Hong Kong runs on US dollars, allowing North Koreans to become more confident in their own currency. Again, the major central banks of the region could provide the backing for that. Third, some of these might be fairly controversial in South Korea. Third, I would say limit two-way population movements at the beginning, only gradually opening the DMZ. Fourth, carefully coordinating the use of foreign aid in North Korea, limiting it to preventing chaotic market situations and deprivation, but not allowing so much aid that the impetus for creating export industry is exhausted. In my view, too much aid from each of the regional powers to date, and maybe even including the US, have wrecked chances of North Korean reform. Only now, at least in the last 2 years, with aid very limited, North Koreans are learning to produce for export. Textile exports, I think, are up like 40% this year. Very good news. So just like the South Koreans learned a generation ago, they need to learn how to export. And also, always remember, food aid sounds good. It doesn't sound so good for a farmer trying to make his living. 5, enable market mechanisms in North Korea. An essential first step is to require that all workers be paid with real money, not with rations. Foreign aid can help to create the new legal and accounting and registration systems. Regional powers will need to collectively enforce market rules as they begin to trade with North Korea on a WTO-compliant basis. 6, create as quickly as feasible a new money and banking system in North Korea. Resolve the foreign debt default issues, reestablish North Korean international credit. China, Japan, and the Europeans can forgive their bad debts as North Korea progressively conforms to international practices. This is in effect what President Park's father did in South Korea in 1962. It's exactly the kind of program that should be promulgated in North Korea. 7, encourage massive land reform for North Koreans, not foreigners or even South Koreans. Privatize land and houses to the current residents. Liquidate collective and state farms and selected other real estate assets. Applying the proceeds to farmers and emerging market sector and to state agencies charged with education, health, pensions, and infrastructure. This is what's been going on in China for the last 30 years. It works. Recharter enterprises as state monopolies, private enterprises, and publicly traded enterprises. In a few cases, only in a few, link these with their South Korean counterparts, maybe the rail and electric power sectors, for example. 9, establish a custom union that includes the South and consistent with South Korean obligations to WTO. Allow free trade in goods and services across the DMZ. This is some years later, so it's a progressive improvements here. Customs barriers would be maintained, however, with China and Russia. 10, finally then allow foreign capital, direct and indirect, to flow into the North. By foreign, I mean South Korean capital as well. By then, North Korean property ownership has been secured and they're ready to use foreign investment in a productive way. 11, then create a monetary union with South Korea, unify the banking system, and proceed that way. 12, lastly, then and only then are you ready to create democratic political union. Now, a lot of this might sound pie in the sky, but a couple points I want to make that tend to make this program work. One is we tend to forget that despite all the poverty in North Korea, the North Korean state effectively owns everything. So in the process of reform, and again, this is what's been happening in China, the state can liquidate its assets. This is already happening. I think some of what we see with their trouble in North Korea is over gradual privatization of assets, which we call corruption. But this process is very positive in that it creates incredible increase in productivity. This is beginning to happen. It needs to encourage. And it alleviates the need for a lot of foreign aid. In other words, like China, North Korea can support most of its own liabilities by privatizing assets, selling its assets to people. And lastly, there are just huge benefits that would come to an improved money and banking system in North Korea. This is what, again, like I say, they have to learn from South Korea. South Korea, you know, was the worst. South Korea looked like a lot like North Korea. I lived in South Korea in the 1950s and 60s. It looked a lot like North Korea does today. What changed? A new money and banking system promoted by President Park's father's regime. That kind of reform element can really change North Korea and set the stage, I think, for a productive, useful, peaceful, prosperous unification.